Hi, I'm Chris Daniga with SwiftOtter, and you're viewing a video that's part of our free preview of our upcoming Magento 101 course. This is a course that's custom tailored for you if you're completely new to Magento and Adobe Commerce, and is going to provide a crucial foundation to walk you through the most critical aspects of development on the platform. So I hope you find the content in this video useful, and stay tuned for the release of the full course. In this lesson, we are going to talk about the structure of layout XML and actually start to get hands-on with writing some of that XML. Now, to start kind of from the beginning here, I want to look at in the Magento theme module that kind of establishes the initial building blocks. Look at a few things that we find here. So layout XML, like we discussed, is it's a bunch of building blocks across different files that end up all getting merged together for the final layout structure of a particular page. And the initial building blocks that other layout files kind of build upon are found in, I should be scrolling faster here, found in this theme module. And there's a couple things that are worth noting here. So first of all, in the view directory of the theme module, we predictably have a front-end directory and an admin HTML directory, but also note this base directory. So when we talked about configuration XML files, we're used to the fact that globally applicable configuration kind of goes in the root of the etc directory, while configuration that's specific to certain areas goes in subdirectories like this, front-end and admin HTML. When it comes to layout, everything that's globally applicable goes in this base subdirectory instead of being like in the root of the view directory. So that's the only difference there. That's what this base directory is for. It's layout that's applicable regardless of the area of the site, front-end, admin, anything. And the first thing I want to look at in here is we have, so if we look in the front-end directory, we have a layout directory, like we've seen, that contains most of the layout XML. But then we also have this page layout directory that's also here in base. And if we look at what we see in page layout, here's this file called empty XML. This is layout XML that does not differ at all from what we find in files in the typical layout directory. The only difference for page layout is what the purpose is. So all these files that are defined in page layout basically define the available layouts that can be applied to specific pages. If we look at the default XML here in the theme module, look at this attribute that is on the root node here, layout, and it's being set to 3 columns. So that's the distinction for these page layout directories. They define the kind of base layouts that can be applied to any page with that attribute. And beyond that, the building blocks they're using, they don't differ at all from typical layout files. So we have everything kind of starts with this empty XML file in this base area in the theme module, with establishing some initial foundational building blocks, and then the other page layouts build on empty. You can see, let's look at one column. You can see that one column builds on the empty layout update handle and builds some more blocks on top of that, and then individual pages or typical layout files will build on these layouts. So it's just kind of a chain of building blocks that are used to put together the final page. You're not going to deal with these page layout files really on a regular basis, but that's just kind of important to get a holistic picture here. If you're trying to kind of trace layout instructions all the way up the tree to the initial containers or initial blocks that they reference, you'll find those kind of root level components in these files. And just a note, if you decide to kind of take a closer look at these page layout files, something that might confuse you here is, for instance, the 3 columns layout file just bases itself on the 2 columns left and then doesn't add anything else here, which is kind of confusing. But the thing to understand is that all of these page layouts regardless of how many columns they represent. All of them actually have the same basic building blocks. The 1 or 2 or 3 column layout visually on the page is just accomplished with CSS. So really, like a 2 column layout still has the same containers. It's just putting what would be 2 separate columns in a 3 column layout. It's just putting them stacked on top of each other in one area of the page. So that's also why the 3 column layout that we see being established as the default in the default XML file, why that can be overridden on a particular page to be a 2 column layout or a 1 column layout without actually losing any of the kind of building blocks or root level components that were initially established. So we have a page layout called empty that establishes the lowest level components of the layout structure. 1 column builds on that. 2 columns left builds on that. 3 columns builds on that. And then, of course, we have the default layout update handle in the typical layout directory that builds on that foundation to create all of the initial containers and blocks that apply universally across the site and which other layout files can then build further on. So let's look at what syntax we actually have in a layout XML file. And most of the important syntax can be found right here in this default XML file that we're looking at. We'll start with, well, first of all, we have the body root node here that pretty much all of your layout is going to go within. But the kind of most important workhorse of a layout XML file is this block node. So whenever we declare blocks, that is a piece of content that's getting inserted in the hierarchy of the layout. Blocks can be nested in other blocks, and these are the key components that actually provide our content. A block node actually is going to result in a PHP object being instantiated when the whole layout system is running and determining what content to render. Every block ends up corresponding with a PHP object, a block class object. That can be specified with this class attribute. You can see this one is doing that. It's specifying a particular PHP class to instantiate for that. This can be omitted, and there's a default template block class that is used for any block that doesn't explicitly declare that. Block classes can have different logic for exactly what they render in final output. The template block class, actually that's the one that's being explicitly declared here. This is the default one, template here. The template class is a block that whose logic is to render a specific template. So we also have an important declaration here. This template attribute specifies a template file that contains the actual HTML for that block, and that's what most blocks are going to do. They're going to be of this template class or a block class that maybe extends it, and their final output is going to be determined by a template that they're going to render. This pattern that we see here for template starts with a module name, and then you see it has this double colon. This double colon here, and so this declares a module to look in for that template, and then a path that is relative to the templates directory. So that's going to be in the view directory, in front end, or whatever area is applicable. Templates is the directory that we're talking about. So it's the path from there relative to the templates directory that's being declared here to assign a certain template to a block. So that's blocks, and of course blocks also have a unique name that identifies them, and this is key to the merging process when you have references to different blocks in different XML files. And then we have containers. So let's look down here and find a container. The initial kind of foundational XML files that we looked at in page layout pretty much consist of defining containers instead of blocks. And they're very similar. They can be nested in similar ways, and then blocks can be nested in containers, but the key difference here is that they're just basically an empty shell. So a container doesn't correspond with a PHP object. Nothing gets instantiated for this during the layout process, but rather containers are just kind of a placeholder that says render all the children of this. So they're just an organizational element. They have a unique name to identify them, just like blocks do, but they just render all of their children. they don't have any unique rendering logic or templates or anything like that associated with them. We can see just a couple of important attributes on this container, which are HTML class and HTML tag. So in the case where this is applied to a container, no, we don't have a block rendering specific output, but we can provide these handy attributes of a particular HTML tag to use and a class to apply to that if they're applied, they will result in that markup being wrapped around whatever the contents of the container are. The companions of the block and container nodes are reference block and reference container. So normally with XML merging, I mean, we would be able to rely on the fact that multiple files could simply have the same node declarations and get merged together when they share a unique name. With layout, for reasons, we actually have reference block and reference container when we want to make reference to an existing block or container that was declared in a different XML file in our own XML. So rather than duplicating the actual block declaration itself and its name and then nesting our layout under that, we're actually going to use reference block with whatever name of the existing block, and then nest our layout within that. That will result in our layout getting nested under that original block. So if we look at you just have a very simple example of our layout XML in our module so far, but we can start to make sense of this when we see that we are starting with a reference container declaration referencing a block, or referencing a container called content, and we're telling the layout system that everything that we're declaring inside this is in that context, as if it was originally nested within the container node. That's most of the important syntax in layout XML, but let's just note a couple of other things that we can see here. First of all, we have both a name and an as attribute for this block, and we could have found that in many instances in this default XML file as well. So every block or every container needs a name that is unique throughout the entire layout, but then you can also apply an alias to it, which is what we're doing with this as attribute. That doesn't have to be unique through the whole layout. It just has to be unique in the context of whatever parent it's nested under. So that can just be a handy way of providing kind of a less verbose identifier for a block that's only meaningful within the context of the parent. In our case, we have a full name called questions.tab, uniquely identifying our block, but then we're just giving it the alias questions in this particular context. The alias is used within template files, while anytime we are actually maybe in our PHP code trying to fetch or deal with blocks from the layout system itself, we'd be using name. Then we also have this after attribute. So there are before and after attributes that are used to instruct the layout system where we want to inject this. Since layout is merged from multiple different sources, we won't necessarily be able to rely on the specific order that blocks appeared in the XML structure if we want to inject a block in a certain parent, but in a particular place relative to its other siblings. That's what this after or before attribute is for. So we are telling it we want this block to be inserted in content, but specifically after a block that already exists called product info details. If we look in this default XML file for another example of this, here we go. Here's a before attribute, and this is just being passed this dash as a value, and that basically means all blocks. So if we have a before attribute with this value, it means insert this before all other blocks, or after with that value means after all other blocks. Then we have argument nodes that we are using here. So this is nested under our block, this arguments node, and then an argument node within it. We will talk more about this later. Suffice it to say, this shares a similar function to what we've briefly looked at in configuration XML files, where these were used to provide arguments for the object when it was instantiated. Similar, but a little bit different, and we will talk about this more later when we actually get to setting view models and other values on our blocks. But for now, let's we're going to look for other files called catalog product view. That is all other layout files that apply to the product detail page. And let's find basically the initial one, the one in the catalog module. Here is all of the layout that the catalog module applies to the product detail page. And at this point, we should be able to, we understand enough about layout XML to basically explain what our layout file is doing to insert the content that we're inserting. So first we have the reference container content. Again, this is a pretty root level element. It's like basically the main content container on the page. So if we look for this in the catalog modules file that's defining all the initial layout for the catalog product detail page, if we search for name content, we're going to find a lot of references to that, but we're not going to find the original block or container declaration. So we see reference container just like in our file, but this file is not the original one where that container is declared, which is pretty expected because, like I said, it's quite a root level container. We actually find that being defined here in this default layout update handle. Here's the original declaration of that container. So that's just kind of a main content area of the page that we're injecting our block directly into. So that means it's going to be going alongside all of these containers or blocks that were originally injected into the product detail page in this file. It'll be a sibling of this product info main container. It'll be a sibling of this product info media container, etc. And we are saying we want our block to come after product info details. Let's look for that in this file. And of course, that's pretty specific to the product detail page. We do find that original block declaration here. Here's this block called product info details that actually corresponds with the tab interface on the product detail page that has an attributes tab and a reviews tab, etc. That's the block that renders that. And so by giving the layout instruction that we want ours inserted after that, that's how we got our content to where it is in the product detail page. This is the kind of detective work you have to do with page layouts in Magento. So sometimes can be more difficult than others when you're determining I want my content to be in this place on a page. How do I find the actual specific block I need to reference, the parent I need to reference, or the siblings I need to reference? Sometimes it takes some detective work looking through these layout files. You can use the particular HTML that you're seeing on a page to zero in on a block by maybe finding the template that appears in and then finding where that template is referenced in layout. You also don't be afraid to start removing swaths of layout XML files to see what changes end up getting affected on the page if you really are having trouble determining what layout XML is doing what. We're just going to make one addition to our layout XML here, armed with all of this knowledge that we have here. So ultimately, what we want to be displaying in our product questions block will include a list of all the current questions and answers that have been posted for this product, but then we also need a form for submitting a new product question. And that's where we're going to start, because once we get to the point where we start actually managing our data, we need a convenient way to create some initial data before we have anything to list. So what we're actually going to end up doing is this root block that we have here will be kind of the parent block that renders all of the existing questions, and then we're going to nest a form block within that. We're going to create a new block for the form we can use to post a question as a child of this block, and we're going to output it from within that template. So just inside the block declaration for questions tab here, we're going to create a new block. We'll call that questions post form. I'm not calling it question form, and we'll see the reason for that later. We're actually going to end up reusing the same block for posting both questions and answers. We can give this an alias too. Let's just give it the alias post form. We don't need to declare a block class because the default template class is going to be fine, but we do need to declare a template. So let's declare a template. Start with our module name just like we have up here, have that double colon, and then a file path relevant to the templates directory. We haven't created this yet, but we're just going to create create our template directly in that templates directory and call it post form PHTML. That's really all our block needs here. So this will append that child block to the parent, and all we need to do at this point is just bootstrap a template that applies to that. So we'll create that same template name we just referenced here in the templates directory, and for now I'm just going to put some arbitrary text in here. And now we've wired up our child block of our parent with its own template, and we're ready to start expanding this out. Now, just a note here, if you have a mind to go and flush your cache and then refresh your product detail page now that you've added this child block, you're not going to see the child content yet. There's something extra that we have to do there, and that just has to do with the fact that the difference between containers and blocks, containers just being empty shells with children will automatically render all of their children, but once we get into the context of a block is responsible for what content it renders, and that includes rendering any of its children. So we've got some additions we need to make to the template of our parent block before it actually renders the child block that we've added to it.